Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a great privilege and honor to introduce today's special keynote speaker, the former Prime Minister of Israel, who is the most renowned political leader and outstanding intellectual leader and the most decorated soldier in Israel. He not only served his country as prime minister, but also he served his Israel as General Staff, Chief of General Staff of Defense Forces in Israel, and Minister of Defense quite recently. Among many other achievements throughout his outstanding, brilliant military and political career, Mr. Barak's pivotal role in various Middle Eastern peace efforts are internationally recognized and praised, highly praised. The Wall Street Journal praised him as, I quote, one of Israel's towering military figures for much of the past 2 decades. Mr. Barak ended Israel's 18-year occupation of southern Lebanon in 2000, and his peace proposals at 2000 Camp David negotiations with the Palestinians remain a blueprint for ending the conflict, unquote. Last year, very well-known journal, Foreign Policy magazine, named him 13th among the 100 global thinkers. His achievements in the economic policy area are also outstanding. Under his leadership of Israel's prime minister during 1999 to 2001, the Israeli economy was able to recover from a prolonged recession and recorded nearly 6% annual growth with record foreign investment, no inflation, and substantially reduced fiscal deficit and external debt. As I mentioned earlier, he is most decorated soldier in Israel's history. By the way, most of you must know what is called Entebbe operation. One of the outstanding achievements in his military career is that he was a key architect of the June 1976 Entebbe operation for the rescue of passengers on the Air France aircraft hijacked by terrorists and forced to land at the Entebbe airport in Uganda. Some of you must have seen the movie about it. Interestingly enough, he studied mathematics and physics in Hebrew University, and then he went to the United States to study economic engineering at the Stanford University. Well, I can go on to highlight his brilliant career, but I will stop here. And this morning, he will share with us his insights on how Israel succeeded in promoting human resources, and particularly young talents and young entrepreneurs. With no further ado, please join me in inviting Prime Minister Barak.
Thank you for your warm words. The Minister of Education, colleagues from abroad, leaders of Korean media, technology, and business guests. I'm here in South Korea for the first time in my life and deeply impressed by what I have seen. I came from a small corner of the Middle East, probably 1/4 in size of Korea, 1 in 6 in the population, but I feel certain similarities. We are both people with extremely long histories, thousands of years. We are both proud peoples. We are both living in an extremely tough neighborhood. And we learn out of experience, both of us, to rely more than anything else upon ourselves. I think that the initiative of the newly elected president here in Korea to promote a creative economy puts us, Israelis and Koreans, once again on an actual present time similarity, a deliberate effort to extract whatever we can from the gifts and talent of our youngsters in order to promote both the nation, its economy, and the well-being of the society. We are living in a tough and a changing world. I have been told there is a Chinese old curse, may you live in interesting times. We have it, abundant. The world is changing. The main characteristics of change is the globalization, the openness. The globe become flat, as the journalist Tom Friedman described it, and much more transparency and empowerment of individuals all around the globe for doing good things as well as to do bad things. Spatialization becomes an essential element in any creating of an edge, and everyone spatialized in the corners of the whole screen where he, as individually or as a collective, has this edge. We are moving from an economy of natural resources and industrial power into an economy of knowledge, where the edge will be based more than anything else on the level of education, creativity, and the capacity to keep the best talents staying home rather than migrate abroad. It's especially true and create a spatial challenge for countries like Israel and South Korea, who are relatively small on global scale and do not have enough natural resources. I was asked to talk about Israel, to describe to you how Israel made it to be advanced society, advanced nation in this newly emerging economy of knowledge. So I should go backward to the establishment of Israel, which happened about the same time as the establishment of modern Korea. We are 65 years old, which means that myself, I still remember the time before the State of Israel. Some of the oldest among you, probably very few, remember the time before Korea came into existence. But Israel, all in summarizing these 6.5 decades, is quite a success story. We are surrounded from day one by enemies who attacked us immediately, 5 neighboring armies, the moment that the establishment of a state of Israel had been ordered. We are probably the only country on earth where neighbors, real neighbors, and even further neighbors like Iran, who is some 2,000 kilometers from our borders, or 1,500, explicitly threaten to erase Israel from map and history. And of course, some of you know that it is Jerusalem, the place where the great prophecy about the end of times, where the lion and the lamb can lie side by side, that came from Jerusalem. But as long as the practice is that you have to replace the lamb every several days, we prefer to be a benign lion. We prefer to be strong and rely on ourselves. As I mentioned, the Middle East is nothing to compare to Western Europe or North America. It's really a tough neighborhood. No second opportunity for the weak. No mercy for those who cannot defend themselves. We went through 7 wars in 65 years and endless, infinite numbers of other operations. But at the same time, in spite of all these challenges, Israel grew in population 10 times. 10 times. We were 600,000 people in Israel before it was just, when it was just established. Now we are approaching 8 million, probably even 12 times. And the GDP was developed 60 times, 60 times. We have an advanced economy, highly export biased, and highly high-tech biased. An eruption of talent among youngsters and entrepreneurial spirit. There are more patents pending and registered in Israel per capita than in any other country on earth. There are more startups per capita than on any other country on earth. There are more PhDs per capita than any other country. And even on NASDAQ, on the other side of the globe, except for Canada, which is neighboring on the strip, just on the northern border of America, Israel is the main participant. More Israeli companies are traded in NASDAQ than probably of all the major countries in Europe. We're in the cutting edge, not just in agriculture and military weapon systems and material or homeland security, which is quite natural for us. But we're at the cutting edge of world science in water processing, from the effectiveness of irrigation to the recycling of wastewater to desalination. 40% of the Israeli water is now desalinated, and we moving toward 50%. When I noticed some difference between Korea and Israel, you have 4 times the area, but 40 times the amount of water. In fact, when we came to Israel, we found an empty country. Half of it, more than half of it, is a desert. There are only 2 lakes, one alive and the other dead, connected with a small river, very famous in history, called River Jordan. Most of you have heard of it. Many miracles happened on its shores, but it's not much bigger than the stream that crosses Seoul. Nothing to compare to the rivers that we have seen from the windows of this hotel. So we found ourselves compelled Because there is no natural source, no water, we had to fight for it. We became extremely advanced in water processing, extremely advanced in renewable energies, extremely advanced in IT and telecom, in cyber security, in medical devices, life sciences, and stem cells. These are the 8 leading elements. All the leading companies in the world, from IBM and Intel, for some 20 years now, to Facebook and Google just recently opened R&D centers, research and development centers in Israel. And every month we see another Israeli companies, some of them young startups, just few years old, that are going exit with hundreds of millions. We somehow missed the point. That's something that you have to teach us, how to move from young startup into the multinational the size of Samsung or LG or Hyundai. That's something that we didn't find, the secret. But with young companies, we are extremely effective. Innovation comes out of necessity. And in the Israeli case, I already described the situation, the starting situation, where we have to fight the absence of everything that enables modern society, from the desert to the shortage of natural resources, but also the defense of the nation created a necessity. We had to have, we are a very small country, surrounded with countries which have probably 10 times the size of our armed forces. We cannot even protect our own borders with the regular army. It's too small. So we have to ask all civilians up to the age of 40 to participate in reservists after they end their mandatory service in the army for almost 2 decades. We need early warning. We need intelligence system that will tell us in advance before the enemy attacks. And we experienced it. It's not just hypothetical theory. Just 40 years ago, Israel was attacked simultaneously by 1.5 million soldiers from Egypt and Syria with thousands of tanks and artillery pieces and hundreds of aircraft. So we experienced once and again, we have to be strong. The defense challenge of Israel compelled us to excel in special forces, in intelligence operations, in intelligence gathering, and we at certain point even started to build, however small the economy was, no more than 100, probably 120 billion in dollars in GDP, and we tried to build independently advanced fighter aircraft. We built our own tanks. We send for 20 years now satellites, both communication as well as intelligence gathering satellite, including with the advanced synthetic aperture radar that can see through clouds and at night. And we needed missile defense. We are surrounded by places about the distance from here to the border, and we are threatened by tens of thousands of rockets and missiles from Lebanon, probably more than 100,000 in Syria, and now 10,000 even from the Gaza Strip, under the Hamas. So we developed our own missile defense, many layers, from the lower layer called Iron Dome that intercepts 85% of all incoming short-range missiles and small caliber rocket, even if it comes in salvos of 20 at the same second. And the system is extremely advanced. It meets the other, the coming missile in the air, like hitting a bullet with a bullet. And it even making differentiation between those, by extrapolation of the trajectory, between those missiles who are going to hit populated areas, they are intercepted, and those who are going to fall on a hill or in a rural area or some field, and they are left. We have another layer to deal with aircraft, with cruise missiles, and with medium-range missile called David Sling, and another one called Arrow and Super Arrow to deal with ballistic missiles that come from Iran or from very far. All those needs together created a compelling imperative to break into technologies that we did not own, and no one would have sold us, because it's national assets, the Americans or whoever hold them. And this was the major shaping force of our high-tech effort. It grew at the beginning underneath the surface like an iceberg. 90% you don't see, you see only the tip of it. What was the answer? Number one, budget. It cannot be done for nothing. Budget and strong backing of the government for the R&D effort. Even encouraging the defense-related contractors and the industry as a whole to invest more than others in the business abroad in R&D. Second, even in the 70s, we have certain bilateral agreement with the Americans, a fund called BIRD, like bird, that invested very small amounts, $2.5 million, $5 million, in small Israeli new startups, basically matching them with Americans, making the, like in wedding, you know, meet the boy with the girl to make sure that they matchmaker, kind of. But it was a good startup. And we started with in-house incubators. We established within the intelligence community 2 incubators, one to answer the needs of the spatial forces for spatial intelligence collecting operation, and the other within the equivalent of the NSA, the Israeli equivalent of NSA. And these 2 incubators made a huge mileage. I still remember myself some 50 years ago as a young lieutenant in one of the Special Forces units. We needed, for some reasons, to be able to transmit from VHF radio waves from underneath the ground. No one transmits from underneath the ground. People put it in high towers or in high antennas and transmit. So there was no publication. I remember myself, together with young engineers, looking at the IEEE, looking for information. Who done it? We couldn't find. But we have to solve it. So we approached the top scientists in the Technion at the time and sat together about what to do, and they brought the best young engineers and the best scientists to solve the problem. That's the way we started. Some 40 years ago, we started with a spatial project of really picking personally the best and the brightest among our youngsters for sciences to employ them in the armed forces. We took all the 1,500 principals of all high schools in the country. Everyone came into a huge hall, bigger than this one, 3,000 people. Everyone picked his chief teacher on sciences, mathematics or physics, and we worked with them to identify individually the best few students at each high school. We got some 10,000 names. We interviewed them personally, all the 10,000, to find who and pass them through SAT-like or GMAT-like tests, and to see who are the best. And we took the 400 leading ones, spread them. Think of it, it's about 4 promils of the cohort, and later on, the 40 best, which is 0.4 promils of the population, really the best. And we took the 400 into 5 years plan of staying in the army, and the 40 people under a project called Talpiot that became famous since then, copied in some places and is working for 40 years. We took these 40 into the best schools of science with the best personal mentoring of the leading scientists for a very intensive academic project of 3 years. But usually they got 2 majors, like mathematics and chemistry or physics and philosophy or whatever, and get some military education, and then serve for 6 years in those labs of the very advanced technology that on the cutting edge of what's known to any science on Earth. And of course, after these 9 years, they become extremely mature, ripe, and experienced into the marketplace. Later on, in the early 90s, we got 1 million Russian Jews came from Russia after the collapse of Soviet. That was the greatest gift. As a young student, I worked in the Weizmann Institute in the Department of Theoretical Physics. The languages were used were English and Hebrew. I came there later on when I was a commander of the armed forces. I came there to visit my alma mater, so to speak, in Weizmann Institute. I found they are all speaking Russian. The Russians took over. That, you know, many things were rotten in the Soviet Union, but culture and education were top priority. So we get a huge boost in our capability, not just in science. We get more philharmonic orchestras than any country on earth, and more chess trainers and ballet dancers now. We used to joke when this wave of Russian came, how do you know that the new Russian immigrant is a pianist? If he doesn't carry, when he goes out of the plane, if he doesn't carry violin under his arm, it means that he's a pianist. And they pushed us dramatically forward. Then came another initiative of the government called Yozma. It was a relatively small in volume, a fund financed by the government, but more advanced than BIRD, in the sense that they allocated it into 10 small funds, each one 10 million, it's almost ridiculous amount, but they created triangles, an Israeli startup, an American VC, and a bank or investment house. Now, the government subsidized the money a little bit. We expect certain matching from the investment bank usually, and the government has certain right for certain royalties, very modest royalties. But, very important, the triangle had a call option on the shares of the established company. Namely, if it's successful, they can get it and enjoy much of the upside. So somehow, if I may put it accurately, the government provided the insurance against failure, but these are relatively small sums, and encouraged good VC and good investment houses to enter by promising them that they are protected against most of the risk, but could enjoy most of the upside. We made major regulation to enable in taxation and many other aspects. There are still now in the best places in the center of Israel startups who are not paying taxes for 10 years. And it creates certain tension. You know, people who are working hard in some factory complain, how come that these youngsters, they are 20 years younger than us, have, each one of them had already the second SUV or a small boat, and they enjoy going abroad very often, and they don't pay taxes. But that's the price of making a deliberate decision to emphasize, to use these youngsters and push them forward. So basically, these are the steps that were taken, and after all these steps from the 70s to the over almost 30 years, there were the eruption of Israeli startups that come like pouring out of a magic machine. But it would not have happened without all these preparations for a long time before. I would like to emphasize a few elements. Number one, this success doesn't seem to me to be technical. There is no kind of secret or magic algorithm, deterministic algorithm that if you just follow it, it will produce this result. The elements of the secret, I believe, are the following: spirit, and I will come to it; culture, and I will come to it; and deep understanding of how to nurture excellence. First of all, I want to correct certain impression that I find very kind of common or often found abroad. People think that all Israel is full of startups. The same thing, the same way that people think that you walk in Israel in the streets and you are always under some danger of being shot by some terror attack. Neither is true. By definition, half of Israelis are under the average of talent and gifts. It's the bell curve, the same. High-tech and startups are a business for the few. It's an elitist, extremely elitist business. And in Israel, I believe there are probably 20,000 such guys, probably 25,000. Probably there is another 20,000 already in Silicon Valley or around Boston, Israelis. That's it. They're responsible for 7% of the workforce because they drag with them many other services. And they're responsible for 14% of GDP or probably 25% of export, but they are still, it's a matter of few. What I mean by spirit? Young people, especially the most capable ones, are not looking just for achievements. They are looking for something which is much more profound. It's a meaning. Meaning, what this whole journey is about. How to make them feel that they are involved in something important for themselves, important for science, important for the society. And you can get this sense of feeling that gives them the meaning, even if the achievements are weighting them down the stream, and not all of them. The rate of failure of startups is very high. It's the feeling, what makes them feel the meaning is a feeling of belonging to a top quality subgroup of the society. When they sit together with their colleagues, they see in the eyes and performance, the quickness of mind, that they are among top youngsters, and they enjoy it. It can compensate for many other things which they are deprived for. Culture. I believe that to more further extent that we are really admit this eruption of talent and spirit in Israel has to do with deep elements of our culture. We are basically quite informal and unhierarchical society. We have this natural tendency to debate everything. We used to joke that in Israel we had a prime minister named Golda Meir some 40 years ago. She always used to complain to American president when she met with them that in Israel there are 7 million prime ministers. In America there is only one president. You meet two Israelis, they have 3 opinions on any issue on the table. And there is a deep culture of debate, starting with our old religious tradition. For those of you who are acquainted with a book called Talmud, which is a very heavy body of some 70 books, it's a history of interpretation of Jewish religion through debate. And it's never-ending debate. And any generation can raise it once again. And within the small groups who discuss the Talmud for 2,000 years now, there is egalitarian approach. There is one who finally makes the decision, but there is no hierarchy. Everyone can raise his voice. So we are living and nurturing. It's not easy, but it's probably simpler in Israel than in other societies. We encourage in special forces and in high-tech incubators this egalitarian spirit, first of all, where you accept failure as a part of life, part of experience, as long as it's not sheer stupidity or grand negligence. Failure when you are facing issues, challenges that you don't know how to solve, and full of uncertainty is something very natural. And we try to follow it. We try to establish a place where there is freedom of thought behind closed door. We respect hierarchy outside the room. But when we close the door, the young sergeant can question the judgment of his colonel. Because the mission is something that no one ever executed. The same applies to the high-tech incubators. The senior scientist, professor, under Professor Emeritus, sits down with the youngster just ended the university, and they discuss issues that no one had solved until now, and there is full democracy, full openness. This nature of encouraging of debate, freedom of thought, no hierarchy when ideas are discussed. Of course, hierarchy in execution, otherwise nothing would have been executed. Accepting of failure as a part of moving forward. And never accept self-kind delusion or self-satisfaction. Always to be, we can be happy and proud outside, but when the doors are closed, we better be never satisfied with what had been achieved. Always looking what could be improved. And discipline in debriefing. Any action, any round of action, any round of R&D, any round of operational should be debriefed with full honesty and clarity in order to create this virtuous circle of moving forward. And it put demands not just on the youngster, for them it comes very naturally to question anything, but for the leaders, because people understand, they feel, even if you don't tell them, if you, the leader, behave as if you are hurt by the fact that you were questioned in front of other youngsters, they will read it, even if it's non-verbal, and it will discourage them. If no new balance is created, where the reward for daring to think out of the box and to do the right thing, even if it's against the judgment of everyone else in the hierarchy, the reward is higher than the penalty for failing sometimes. In most of ourselves, if we look in the mirror, especially when we become more and more senior in our roles, we know that sometimes subconsciously we project total intolerance for failures and very modest rewards for success. And this should be corrected if we want people to step or be always on their toes and not acting out of fear. There is a price for working in internal incubators. The most prominent of them is the fact that it is scientific work, but you cannot publish. You know, there is in the university we also always say, publish or perish. If you don't publish your records, you are ignored, you are not quoted, you are not respected. So we ask some of these people not to publish, because if they publish, the enemy will read it as well and it will leak. But this discipline is compensated in other ways. We find the ways to express the respect of the leadership on the national level to the individuals who are doing their job in these R&D advanced incubators without ever publicizing their work. It's now we are after almost 40 cohorts of Talpiot, 40 cohorts of the 400 groups, and 20 years of Yozma and many others. And we know at the beginning, all these initiatives faced with a lot of rejection. It is only when it starts to succeed that people started to accept it. We should understand the dynamics of creating excellence. You cannot impose excellence upon a whole society. You have to start the way that raindrops are created. It's basically the vapors of water accumulated around micronic particles in the air. You have to create, first of all, islands, however isolated, islands of excellence, sometimes behind the closed doors of defense establishment or industrial operation. Although I should tell you in bracket, my experience is that very big organizations, industrial operations, become a little bit too rigid for real, vibrant, and creative activity. There is too much hierarchy, too many layers, sometimes huge power kind of PhDs and everyone, and a lot of politics, internal politics, I mean. Sometimes it's better to create isolated units. They are isolated from the rest of the operation, given certain backing or good backing, but a lot of freedom to think out of the box and come with results. And it is only when you create these islands of excellence, by picking sometimes personally the individuals to be part of it, and personally who is the kind of financial backer, and keeps these harmonious small operations. When they start to yield fruits, and when people see the results, they get the self-confidence, and others try to replicate the experience. 35 years ago, I was a student at Stanford, a graduate student in School of Engineering. And in most of the science faculties, you find at the top of the class some Jewish people, usually not Israeli, but some Jews from America, from Europe. Some 15 years ago, 20 years later, I came to Stanford, I visited the professor, asked him, who are the leading students in the class? He told me, Koreans, Japanese, Chinese. So it's not about talent. We all have the same talent, a millimeter underneath the skin, we are the same, but there is a need to work a lot. You have shown in many other areas that you have this capacity for self-discipline, for targeted target-oriented work. We around the Mediterranean always repeat a Greek old saying that if you do not know which port you want to reach, no wind will take you there. So you showed once and again that you decide where you want to reach and you go there. You show it in your history of establishing the impressive infrastructure of the country, the huge industrial operations, the cutting edge of technologies, even the level, the standards of education, the achievements of individual students en masse is something which is a subject for envy all around the world. So I believe that you got it, so I think that the President initiative is in place. I think that time is ripe. I have no doubt that you can achieve it on the same level, probably better than we did. I think that there are certain elements in the Confucian culture that has to be dealt with in a subtle way to allow this spirit of freedom to break the hierarchy, so to speak, at least behind closed doors when you work on something where age and experience doesn't give you necessarily a real edge. And I believe that people now are open enough and they see the results, and especially when they start to see the results. I remember the resistance that we faced. And nothing will come easy, but I have no doubt that you can do it. I should emphasize from my experience, some lessons could be learned from our experience. The same way I keep telling Israel, many lessons could be learned from what the Koreans achieved in the last 65 years for Israel. But it never can be copied. We cannot just go to Samsung or LG or Hyundai, see what they have done, try to replicate it. It won't work. There are different circumstances with different culture, different spirit. It's always mutatis mutandis, as the lawyers are saying. You have to adapt it, to transform it, to take into account the subtleties of your culture, your history, and so on, and do what should be done. I'm confident if you did it, we'll find a lot of area and fields to join hands, work together in the future to make both Korean and Israeli societies more more happy, more successful on complicated world arena, and with not a simple situation from within. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for sharing with us your very illuminating insights with us regarding how the human resources and particularly young talents can be promoted based on your Israeli experience. Although, as you rightly said, the two countries have many similarities. However, there are many differences as well, and therefore you cannot replicate or emulate exactly the other's model, no matter how successful they are. However, we can draw very useful lessons from others' successful experiences. In that regard, I suppose we can draw many valuable lessons from you. While listening to you, I was quite impressed by your emphasis on the spirit and culture. In my view, that those are very, very critical factors for the Korea to promote young entrepreneurs and many startups. Of course, funding and finance, techniques, and all those skills are important. However, you need to have socially favorable atmosphere for startups and the entrepreneurial activities. In fact, only a couple of days ago, I just ran into a survey done by one of the research institutes in Korea, which, according to the interview, more than 50% of parents oppose their sons and daughters' idea of starting a startup, because most of them believe that once they fail, they will have no second chances. I think this is really critical problem, the social intolerance to failures in startups or entrepreneurial the initiatives. I think this is a very important factor which you mentioned. I don't know how we can change that atmosphere in a short period of time, but still this is a challenge. Another point you made was the non-hierarchical, the culture, informality, and debate. Again, Korean society lacked the sense of debate and the atmosphere of debate. Whether you are right or wrong, there's no logic of why you're right, why you're wrong, and continued debate, which is really our problem. So I just wanted to say that I cannot agree more with you on these particular points.
May I probably respond to
Yeah.
your remark?
Yeah.
You know, I can tell you an answer through a story, how Israeli parents behave. I married my wife just recently, so we brought into our marriage, I have 3 daughters, and she has 2 daughters and a son. Her youngest son, he served in one of these, he was selected one of these 400, not into the 40s, and sent to our equivalent of the NSA, working on highly classified intelligence-related projects. His mother, who also was agent of Mossad and worked in the intelligence, could not be told by him what he's doing in the armed service. Afterwards, he studied mathematics and biology in the Hebrew University. Then he studied second degree in mathematics, became a data scientist from Courant Institute in New York University. So he was a quite successful guy, but he started to go to startups. I believe 2 or 3 that didn't fly. He said, there, raised some ideas about to improve services for people who go to restaurants in New York or whatever, I know, something that didn't fly. And then again, something that didn't fly. But he never lost sight, and his mother never lost sight that he's doing the right thing. Finally, he joined 1.5 years ago. He joined another startup as the data scientist, and the scientist, other technological guy. The startup was 1.5 years old at the time. Now it's 3 years old. It was sold 2 weeks ago, a month ago, it was sold to Facebook for several hundred millions. And all the workers, including these young scientists, data scientists, they were adapted to the workforce of Facebook. Now they spend their time flying business class to San Francisco and back. So if he would not, if a failure would be a stain, he would never reach this place of work, which is one of the best on earth. It's only because we accept that youngsters can make. They worked hard, but most startups fail. But the knowledge which is acquired by the individuals and by the society doesn't go up. In Israel, when the dot-com bubble exploded, probably 2,000 startups were closed. But the youngsters carry with them all the scientific and technological knowledge that was acquired, and the moment that the crisis ended, they were ripe and ready to renew efforts at much more advanced point.
Yeah, yeah. This is true in Israel, and it's true in Silicon Valley too, I think. You know, those who failed in startups, they proudly put on their resume.
Yeah.
But in Korea, they're trying to hide them because there's a sign of, you know,
But I've
incompetence,
noticed,
which is not.
I came here just 36 years ago. I went to a Buddhist temple. I saw many extremely crowded with women praying. I asked the monk, chief monk, what they are praying for. He told me there is in 2 days or in 1 day entry exams for their kids. They're praying for success. So basically they are caring of the right thing. Yeah. So it's something that should be developed. I cannot give you a recipe. Of course, in Israel, for example, it's impossible to hold the streets so clean and everything runs so orderly because it's informal and unhierarchical. So each society has its strengths and weaknesses, but we have to carefully, cautiously try to educate the parents. And I think that the best proof will come from successful startups. That's why I talked about islands of excellence. You don't need thousands of them. It spreads very fast through modern media. Success stories spread very fast. You just have to need them to find these extremely capable youngsters who will be the starters of the startup creative economy.
Yeah, I fully agree. This is a big challenge for us. Now, change the subject. You are the political leader as well as the most decorated soldier in Israel, and your experience in military service is very, very extensive. And also in startups or entrepreneurship or whatever, in Israel, the military is a big factor, very important factor. And Korea also, we maintain a very large army, and we do have a compulsory armed service system. The difference is in Israel, I just heard from Mrs. Barak that in Israel, not only men, women also are subject to compulsory army service. In fact, she told me you both met in army. Now, could you tell us a bit more about the role of military with regard to the human resource promotion and the promoting entrepreneurship in particular?
No, I think that army could be something which is very rigid and, and kind of square, or something very entrepreneurial and creative. It depends on the overall situation. Being an army is not a typical profession. The main difference is that in all professions, if you are a journalist, you have to wake up in the morning and write article for tomorrow. If you are a professor, you have to either go to the lab and make research or to teach students. If you are a surgical doctor, you come every morning to start to cut real bodies, real life behind them. So in all professions of life, even if you are a lawyer, you have to work very hard to know the case of the client better than he knows it in order to defend him. So in all other professions, you are waking up in the morning and coming to the core of your profession and practice and excel yourself. In military, it's something totally different. You never do the real thing. You can wait decades, sometimes generations, without doing anything but simulations, which look for the naked, bare eye, especially of ignorance, look similar to war, but there's nothing to compare. Because in any exercise, however impressive of the armed forces, there is no enemy, no one shoots at you, if your own colleagues are disciplined enough. And you basically, there is no psychological pressure. No one is going to lose. It's just an exercise. So we are through simulations, and in some, here I don't remember a major war since the Korean War. It's decades. Most of the armies become kind of, most armies on earth become somewhat sclerotic as a result of it. But in Israel it's different because we go to a real war every 10 years or so, and we have many operations in between. So at least the units at the cutting edge, at the edge of the spear, they have always on their toes. Our fighter pilot squadrons, until 20 years ago, had always under the pressure, within minutes they can be in airfight. It was only after 82 when we destroyed 84 enemy airplanes without losing even one, that no one dares to fly into Israel. But in the special forces, for example, we always in a stress of a real fight. It's a real battle where there are people on the other side being neighbor armies or intelligence services or terrorists. They are as clever as we are. As clever as we are, as sophisticated as we are. And as the French saying goes, the guillotine sharpens the senses. So the possibility that you will be killed makes you very alert to do whatever could be done. So extremely creative atmosphere is there. Now we had technological support with many tricks. I don't want to dive into it, not even classify. That we adapt the best science in order to make our fighters more effective, be able to kill the other one without being killed, if necessary. As I mentioned, we are benign. We don't touch anyone if he's not a terrorist. But if he's a terrorist, we want to kill him, not to be killed by him. And we adapt a lot of technology into intelligence gathering, into understanding what happened, and this wild, kind of free spirit that does not accept limitation, does not see something as impossible, it was developed within the special forces that worked hand in hand with the most extreme technological kind of and science that Israel can put. And because the challenge was there, we were always on our toes. So that's why in Israel the defense, research and development became so effective. I cannot recommend to anyone to replicate it if the armed forces do not have concrete challenges that could end up with tragedy if you fail in, and they are coming to test continuously in peacetime, not just in wartime. Because under this situation, it will die naturally. You cannot create excellence. It's probably easier to create a new enterprise with small and middle-sized business if they get certain guarantee from the government that failure will not taint them. Government can participate. You can afford it with the size of your economy, over $1 trillion, to help small and middle-sized businesses to run entrepreneurial spirit, and probably an isolated, independent cells within the big show balls, the big conglomerates. But I feel that probably small and medium-sized business is better atmosphere, better environment for young companies and startups.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, you did mention in your presentation, in your speech, the Yozma Fund.
Yeah.
Could you tell us, for the benefit of our policymakers, more details about the Yozma Fund?
What kind of the
we
were, it was the beginning of the 90s, I remember I was at the time commander of our armed forces, and government raised an idea. Well, it seems that even when the youngsters, we were already 20 years into the process of preparing the best minds in technology within the iceberg underneath the surface within the defense establishment. But we felt that when they come out, they don't know how to translate their technological edge into a company. So an idea came from the chief scientist at the time of the MITI, the Minister of Industry and Trade. They have chief scientist, and he raised it, and it was accepted. The country, even at the time, could afford putting 100 million. We knew from the previous decade, experience with Bird, that the matchmaking with some American companies does not suffice, because usually the American, either it goes just as a gesture of a good behavior kind of ritual, or if it's really successful, they swallow it when it's young and it disappears. So we wanted to have the fruit. So we established 100 millions into some 10 different funds. And as I mentioned earlier, the idea was not just to make matches, not just to let Israelis know here is an American example how something, because the situation is totally different in America than in Israel. So it tried to create those triangles that I mentioned, to put together an Israeli startup. There was many, so if you select out of several hundreds at the time, the best 10, it's very high chance that those 10 made out of several hundreds are really good ones. And put an Israeli startup, an American VC, because the Americans already started, you know, Intel was almost on the verge of opening a major fab in Israel. Some other advanced companies at the time already had R&D. So it was known that there is good manpower that you buy for about 1/4 of what you pay them in America. So there was some interest. So put together an Israeli startup, an American VC, and a bank or an investment house. Because there is, as many of you know, with startups you have seed round and round A, there is a need to pour some more capital along the way to follow up on the initial research and development. And basically, this bank would almost have no risk at the beginning. They put probably some 40% of the money as matching. And the youngsters start to work with the American VC giving certain guide. But the exit was prearranged in a way that if it is successful, then the government deserves very modest royalty, because we didn't want to make money out of this, just to encourage the economy, probably to cover part of the insurance for failure. But in order to attract the American VC and mainly the investment house, we gave them a call option that they can buy the shares from the government at a not prefixed price, but very low price, that probably double of the initial investment, something like this, very, very low relatively to a successful exit. And in fact, at the end of the experience, after some 5 years, it ended up that, first of all, it was successful, the project, basically successful. I think that probably 8 or 9 out of the 10 initial startups, the call option was exercised. They basically took the relevant for here. I, for example, feel that the issue of the money, the kind of financial backing for startups is relatively simple. With an economy which is number 15 in the world in terms of size, probably more than that in terms of export, you are extremely powerful economy that can easily, you know, and in fact there are many a lot of resources are investing through the big conglomerates. I don't think that the money backing should be the main issue, probably the understanding, subtle understanding of the process, the psychological and practical elements, and how to keep those youngsters together, how to deal with them, how to encourage them, how to make them of a kind of enthusiast geeks into people who understand a little bit the business side of it, and keep certain proportion and give managers to do the manage and scientists to do the science and so on. It's more experience about how to deal than the technical structure. I would be careful on copying point to point. I'm even a little bit fearful of technical copying, because when you technically copy something, you subconsciously admit that you think that you have an algorithm, kind of like production orders for producing something. In production process, you should be able to follow exactly the rules. Otherwise, you will end up with something that doesn't work. But in startup, it's different. It's continuous creative process that changes itself along the way too many times, and I would not adopt any algorithm. Algorithms do not work. It's more, it's a gestalt, more sophisticated process.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I don't think it's really easy to replicate, to emulate others' models, but we do need some valuable lessons drawn from you. Of course, we have to adapt to our situation, but still, the particularly for government policymakers and those public institutions supposed to support startups and young entrepreneurs, the main purpose there is not making money on the part of government. However, in the political atmosphere, for example, if any public enterprise in which government has the investment in it, and if they lose money, I'm sure they will be called to National Assembly, and that there will be the scolded for that. So I think this kind of the culture and institutional consideration, all these are very, very important, along with technical assistance and the financing. But I think I cannot agree more with you, emphasizing the spirit and the culture of having these kinds of systems.
May I add to it that I think that you can nurture, and the inspiration coming from top. I listened to the Prime Minister, we heard the President is the good kind of message to the public. And it's a matter of perspective. You can look at it as an investment. Kind of investment, you make it R&D. So part of the investment is to educate the people how to make a startup, which takes part of them, the successful one, into making a lot of money for the society. Or probably to look at it the way you look at education. The state, as well as individual parents, pay a lot in order to make sure that their children will get the best possible education. It takes years, from 20 to 5 years, depends where you start to count, of investment before you can see the fruits. And you spend the money, you don't see a bottom line. And the same approach should be used in regard to these projects. You shouldn't ask, like an already living business, every quarter what happens there. And you even should take into account that on the average, 9 out of 10, or probably 19 out of 20, will fail, for sure, not probably, for sure. Right. And if there is no tolerance for this, people will not be motivated to go into it. So there is a need for certain kind of thinking sincerely about it and try to draw conclusion, even if it goes against conventions within the society. But that process that only you can do with yourself. And I believe that once the need is clear and the objective set from the top of the political ladder, I think you have a good chance to do it, and it's basically in your hands. We always are ready to help, but it's basically in your hands.
Well, thank you very much. I suppose we can go on since it's a very rare opportunity to have you here, so we can have many more the issues to be discussed, and then also I suppose I can have some questions and comments from the floor, but we are a little bit behind the schedule already, so we have to end here.
Next year, don't worry, it won't be solved, all of it. By next year, there will still some work.
Well, certainly your insights and wisdom will be very, very highly appreciated and will be taken into full consideration in making our policies and those who are willing to initiate the startups here. We have many youngsters, and the government does emphasize the importance of startup and this what it is called the creative economy. And your visit here will be very, very valuable. And with this, we have to conclude. Please join me in thanking Prime Minister.